Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for rejoining us. We'll now move on to our second panel, which will focus on standardization and smart risk allocation in public construction. And as Bruce mentioned earlier this morning, this is an area that has been widely discussed across the industry for many years. There is broad recognition that greater standardization can improve efficiency and reduce uncertainty, but progress has been slower than many would like. Today's discussion will explore what's holding that progress back, where we're seeing movement, and what practical steps could help move the industry forward. And I'd now like to turn it over to my CDAO colleague, Sandro Perruza, to moderate the panel.
Thank you, Andrew. Everyone in this room feels the effects, just in different ways. So today, what we're really talking about is, does it have to be this way? There's a growing sense across the industry that greater standardization, whether in contracts, procurement approaches, or even technical specifications, can help reduce friction, improve clarity, and ultimately deliver projects more efficiently. But we also know it's not as simple as one size fits all. Local needs matter, professional responsibilities differ, and what feels balanced from one perspective can feel very different from another. So that's what makes this conversation so important and so timely. We have a fantastic group of panelists here today who bring a legal, technical, commercial, and procurement perspectives. Today, they'll explore whether standardization is really working, where it breaks down, and more practical, coordinated approaches could look like. We'll also tackle one of the most persistent and sometimes contentious issues in our industry: risk allocation, and whether we're really truly assigning risk to the party best equipped to management. So let's dig in and start to get into this panel. So I'm really pleased to introduce our panelists. And as I call your name, can you please introduce yourself to the audience? And let's go alphabetically by first name. So Amanda.
Sure. Thanks, Sandro. My name is Amanda Froese. I'm the president of Meritech Engineering. We are a land development and municipal consulting firm based out of Waterloo region. I have 20 years experience doing that in the private and 6 years in municipal. So bring a perspective to this conversation from both sides of the bidding.
Thank you, Amanda. Annik.
Hi, I'm hoping everyone can hear me. I can't quite seem to get my camera to work, so apologies there. My name is Annik Forristal. I am a partner at McMillan LLP, specializing in construction law and particularly on front-end project delivery and construction contracts of all kind.
Okay. Thank you, Annik, and we can't hear you. So
wonderful.
Mike.
Hi, thanks, Sandro. My name is Michael Mooney. I am the I'm past president of OSPE, as well as market leader for water with Ainley Group. My experience spans construction, municipal consultants, and regulatory for the past 20 plus years. So I bring a perspective from kind of all the stakeholders that are wrapped up in this idea of standardization. So,
perfect, thank you. And Raly.
Raly Chakarova, Executive Director for the Toronto and Area Road Builders Association. TARBA is the collective bargaining agent for all the contractors that build transportation infrastructure within the GTA and north into Simcoe County. So not just roads, but transit, bike lanes, sidewalks, you name it. So really happy to bring forward the contractor perspective here. And I guess self-identified policy wonk. I love good policy and good governance. So really excited to have this conversation.
Okay, thank you. We hope to have some time left for questions. So if you do have any questions, I encourage you to put them in the Q&A and I'll try to get to them. So let's dig into the conversation. So first thing is really looking at every stakeholder in this room experiences the consequences of having 444 municipalities just in Ontario running different procurement systems, but in very different and distinctive ways. Contractors price risk into their bids, engineers navigate conflicting specifications, lawyers manage the disputes that follow, and procurement professionals bear the pressure of both compliance and accountability. But what does this fragmentation actually cost each of us? And is it truly benefiting the status quo? So, Amanda, let's start with an engineering perspective. How does this problem impact your ability to effectively price and design a project?
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. When we go from municipality to municipality, and my experience is up in smaller rural Ontario, there's many different pieces that you have to decide which is good and which are bad and who you're going to bid with. So my first example is about insurance. So some municipalities want 2 million errors in emissions, some want 5 and some want 10. And it does cost us a different amount to have that level. So we have to decide whether we're going to bid or not, or we're going to take the risk, because if we can't afford to have the higher risk, then it's on us. If it was standardized, then that would not have to be part of the conversation going into it. Same with the how meetings are done. All those things, when you're working with a consultant, can be worked into the price and can be worked into the schedule. But as a bidding, it's a lot more simple to have it for us to be done all the same across a different region.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike.
Yeah, so I think Amanda hits on a really important part with the fragmentation, and that is ideally to get the best price and solutions for what we're doing in a competitive market. We want to have the most firms, contractors being able to bid on the work. And the fragmentation really creates standards where you're limiting who is willing to take on the work. If we're looking at risk through insurance, you're having consulting firms, sometimes the smaller, more familiar firms, sometimes the larger firms that are backing away from bidding because of risk allocation. We'll talk more about that later. But I think really generally is the fragmentation actually is kind of creating these silos of markets and is kind of limiting the pools of resources that we can draw on and or bidding. And so that drives prices up just from basically lack of competition and unfamiliarity with the various markets. So
thank you for that. And Raly, I'm sure you hear from your members all the time. So what perspective can you share from them?
I mean, completely agree with what Amanda and Michael have said to date. The way I describe it is fragmentation is a hidden risk tax on everything that we build. And the reason for that is the costs are substantial. And I would describe them as there's higher upfront costs, and then there is higher costs because of claims and disputes that come as part of that ambiguity. And that difference that lots of the parties are actually not familiar with. But what it also does is it lowers our productivity and in some cases our performance and what the safety of our infrastructure looks like, because we have no economies of scale. Everybody is doing things differently. And I think our area here with the Greater Toronto area is such a good example of that, because you have 29 municipalities and regional authorities that all do things more or less differently. So we've had cases where the same road, the same use road is being done, a kilometer of it is in one municipality, 100 feet is done in a different one, and the spec is different once you cross that imaginary border. So I think it begs the question, and I think you asked it, like, who benefits from this? And the answer is no one. At best, no one benefits from this. And at worst, what we do is we make these inefficiencies, they become institutionalized and then become part of our system, and it sort of compounds. And I think we didn't get this way overnight. It certainly took some time to get to the wild, wild west, I think, that we see across Ontario right now in terms of the difference of specs and contracts. But here we are. And I think it was the compounding of project after project, municipality after municipality, year after year, that really brought us here.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to say it's a very important part that Raly brings up with the economies of scale. I mean, we're seeing escalating costs across the board, whether it's transportation infrastructure or housing infrastructure, because we're not able to take advantage of those economies of scale, which we largely have in the early days, we kind of were benefiting from that, and we seem to be getting more and more fragmented. We don't seem to be kind of coming back together to take advantage of that, and that is driving the affordability in this province up, and that's a challenge. So.
No,
And I would say
absolutely.
too, like when I was at the county, we had group purchasing opportunities, so we could buy snow plows at a discounted rate because in this group buyers world, we got a better price because it was by that the larger purchasing power. So the same thing here, we're seeing a lot of municipalities go to a roster because it takes a lot less time. With the economy the way it is, a lot of municipalities are seeing 20 consultants bid their work, which means with the two envelope system, they have to read 20 proposals, and that's 4 staff members typically doing that. It's a lot of effort. So when they go to a roster, then they do that once, and then they can pick from those groups. But if you had a group purchasing thing with a roster, then just say all of Bruce County or all of Grey County could have the 10 people on the roster, and it would all be standard. It would be the standard unit rates for hours, and through a larger geographical area, everybody would be getting the same treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Fragmentation does cost us all, and we're happy to have Annik back. She has got her camera going. So,
So sorry.
yeah, no worries. What's your perspective with respect to fragmentation and its cost increases?
I mean, certainly fragmentation makes it so that the time it takes to review and understand the risk allocation in your contract, the terms for doing business just takes more time. So when there's more regularity, consistency in terms, then we can more quickly review the documents that are included in the RFP and really focus in on the project specific details as opposed to trying to relearn all of the little nuances of the contract every single time. So certainly fragmentation does impact efficiency in that respect.
Okay, so we've understood the cost of fragmentation and some of the consequences. I'm in a unique position because my members, are on the consulting side, but they're also my members work in municipalities, and some of my members are also lawyers. So I have actually members in all of your stakeholder groups. But I also have spoken to the Public Buyers Association, attended their conference. So I understand the pressures that procurement professionals are under because they do need consistency to ensure fairness and accountabilities. So, specifications are important because engineers need that to reflect their technical reality of what they need to design. Contractors like that because of their predictability to price accurately. And again, lawyers need the clarity to avoid disputes because I'm sure they don't like litigating disputes. But can we design, is it really practical to design a standardization framework that serves all of these needs all at once? When you have all these inevitable trade-offs that we as professionals really need to honestly confront. So Raly, again, your association is leading the charge on standardization. So what are your thoughts? I'll let you go first.
You know what? It's a great question, and that's what it keeps coming forward all the time, right? And I think when we first started this conversation with the Ontario government, the position was it's impossible. We cannot standardize. There's too much variance and too much difference out there. And I would say we can't afford not to standardize that. I think, of course, there's always, devil's always in the details, and there will always be exceptions, and there will always be a need to have a little bit of flex. But I think 80 to 90% of the infrastructure delivery is fundamentally the same across jurisdictions. So I think it's better to think about it in terms of what we're trying to build and where. So if there's a climate difference, Ontario is quite a big province, that makes sense. And I'm talking about the specifications here. And in the type of roads that we use, right? Like from highways all the way down to dead end city streets or rural streets. I think there are considerations that we need to keep in mind about where that infrastructure is and how it's being used. But it is fundamentally more or less the same. So I have yet to find a good justification for why every municipality needs to have their own specifications and their own way of doing things. And I think I want to backtrack here and say, I think the problem is actually systemic because there is lots of really competent, well-intentioned people at the municipal level, right? And I think at the best of ways, everyone wants to do things in the best way possible and what they think is the right approach forward. But what they're incentivized to think is that project and that municipality. That frame of mind doesn't actually go broader to say, hey, who else is doing this, or what are our neighboring municipalities doing, and how can we coordinate better so that we can tap into those economies of scale and we can actually get cheaper bids. So that's what I mean, that the system as it is designed right now doesn't allow for that broader thinking. And that's actually why we engage the province, because it is their responsibility to think sort of on a bigger scale. We have a tremendous amount of infrastructure to deliver. And Bruce really set the stage this morning with his presentation about how much we actually need to build moving forward. And I think, Sandro, you made the point, some of these high profile projects that have come through have really shown a closer light on like, why does it cost so much more to build here? Why does it take so much longer when there are international projects in Europe and elsewhere that are actually much bigger, much more complex, but are delivered for cheaper and faster? So I think those are really the fundamental questions that talk about the not being able to afford not doing standardization.
Yeah. So, inevitably conflict is going to happen. And everyone thinks that they're different. Everyone thinks that they're unique. And then it leaves it up to the legal professional to sit there and say, well, you're not really all that different. And really, the issues aren't all that unique. So, Annik, you've got like a very extensive legal practice dealing with a lot of these issues. So I'm going to let you weigh in here. Do we really need that many different? Is everyone really unique?
I mean, I'll say yes and no. I agree that, most construction contracts include a lot of the same terms. Like you take a look at the CCDC2 and the 14 and the 5B, and the terms relating to the work are all the same with just little tweaks for, construction manager versus contractor. But there's a lot of similarity across those terms, for example. So I think there is definitely room for some standardization of terms. I think a key critical component of that, though, will be the process for how we reach that standard. Because CCDC, for example, has a very involved process that engages the owners, the architects, the engineers, the contractors, the spec writers. And they engage together to reach agreement on these clauses, and that process that they go through engenders trust in the balance that they strike. And so even though not everyone might be happy with what's in there and, may have their own personal twists that they'd like to put on it, the process that has gone through in creating those standards engenders trust and helps create a balance that I think, if we're going to be looking to more regularized terms being used, for example, by the OPSS on the contract side, strongly recommend that we have a process that is equally coming out of a balanced discussion as opposed to something that may come from one side. So that's one thing. But the other thing that I also regularly see is, for example, even just with the payment terms, everyone has a different idea of what they want to do for this project and what their deal is. And to that end, everyone is a little bit unique. Like it's almost never, let's just fill in the number for the contract price in this blank space. Everyone has, okay, but yes, but then over here, this is what we're going to do with the Div 1 general condition items. And over here, this is what we're going to do and deal with profit and overhead in these kinds of ways. And actually, we're going to handle the insurance and bonding costs in this way. So the parties do often bring a lot of unique elements that make sense in the context of their project, in the context of their experience as well, that they're looking for the contract to be flexible to address. So I think together with if we're going to standardize, having a process that's balanced, that engenders trust in the standardized terms that result, but also provides sufficient flexibility for the parties to bring their commercial terms and some of the unique circumstances and needs that they will inevitably have. Like I'll give an example of in the MEA ACEC contract when I was working on that with Amanda and the team there. One of the cool things that came out of that was a number of options for licensing of the intellectual property rights that the engineer has in the instruments of service. Because the conversation with the owners was there's different ways sometimes that we need to use the intellectual property. Sometimes we use it for more than, or we will make use of it for more than just the project at hand. Sometimes we share it with other municipalities. And so that led to us preparing different license options within the standard form that the contracting parties could elect depending on the circumstance. So again, it was recognizing that there wasn't one size fits all for a term that we often do see pretty standardized in a contract, but that to meet the owner's needs needed to have a little bit more flexible options. But then we were able to create standardization within those options. So again, I think lots of different ways to crack the egg, but we're going to need a process to get there that we trust, that is balanced, that has all the right voices at the table, and flexibility worked in the right places to allow for that freedom of contract and unique elements that, I mean, we do have over 400 municipalities. They are going to have some unique needs, and that's fair as well.
Okay. Michael, did you want to weigh in on this? Again, you're dealing with all these different parties, so you and on a number of different projects. So do you really see the need for all these different requirements?
Yes, I mean I'm a yes and no answer again too, and so I mean I'm a big proponent that we need to be standardizing to kind of help engage, and in some cases that does mean creating mandatory specifications and other things that all municipalities should be using. But I think Annik raised kind of the interesting point is the part that really needs to be standardized for the most benefit is the process in which how we get to whether it's the specifications or the agreements that allow enough flexibility to reflect kind of the on the ground realities of the proponents involved, but also have taken into account kind of the positions and haven't really been one party only kind of dictating. One of the biggest things I always say is like, we always tout that we need this demand for consistency to ensure fairness, but the only thing that's consistent in the practices right now is that they're consistently inconsistent across municipalities. And so we need to fix some of those processes to create that level of consistency. And I think depending on the contract, so when we talk about roads, as Raly has indicated, there's a lot of similarities. It doesn't really matter on jurisdiction. It's more predicated on what the environmental conditions are, on how the standards change. But when we talk about other types of designs, so if we talk about water and wastewater and kind of quality and receiving waters and that, we start getting again into a lot of environmental constraints that kind of are dictating what the standards and processes have to be designed for. So again, we need some level of flexibility to reflect what is actually happening in those environmental constraints. But the big area I'd like to see us kind of improve on is that area of kind of being consistent in the application of our processes and how we're developing and how we're working how all the proponents are kind of working together to create what I would say is standardization. The other piece we need to look at is we need to make sure we're not standardizing bad processes or bad standards, because that's equally as disruptive and costly to the things. So we really need to be kind of reviewing these things and understanding that standardizing things alone isn't the only part to get us to where we need to be. We need to be making sure that what we're standardizing works and it's applicable and it's good and it's adaptive enough, because we've all seen more than enough cases where we've been presented with something where we've been told we have to do this, and it makes zero sense from both the risk and practical design and construction standpoint for the standard for the location that we're dealing with. So I think really that would be what I would like to see kind of us go. And I do know, like a lot of municipalities are standardizing in other areas of their procurement practices. Amanda mentioned like group buying policies for operational stuff and that the municipalities have. And so the municipalities do have experience in trying to kind of set up these groups and kind of standardizing across. It just hasn't totally migrated over to like the design, engineering, construction side of their procurement practices. And so I think there's an opportunity here for us to look at some of those group buying efforts that are in place as well and kind of help us understand what works, what doesn't, in kind of the standardization process. So,
Excellent. And now, Amanda, you were on that group that Annik had referenced about the Municipal Engineers Association and the Association of Consultant Engineering Companies of Ontario working together, coming up with a standardized contract. So I'm going to give you the last word on this. Is it possible?
It is. And
Oh, yeah.
sorry, I think we both unmuted me, Susan and myself. So sorry. It is definitely possible. It was a great discussion. It was the third time that the groups had gone back and forth. And then this one we said, well, let's both hire a lawyer and we'll both pay and make it an impartial piece. But it was a great discussion about what we actually do in municipalities because it's one taxpayer, right? We recognize that if Kincardine has paid for a design of a retaining wall that can be used as a conceptual design up the lake in Port Elgin, then why not be allowed to share that? But then the engineer can check the box now that says, yes, you can share this information for conceptual things. So all of those things work. You can put them in. My only warning would be you have to be careful of how many special provisions you allow and customizing, because then we just get back to where we are today, where it's all different. So it needs to have a governance structure over it that gets reviewed and things get added. My example would be in our firm, we have a form of tender that's standard. We use in every single project, but every year we're adding on to the bottom the new items that are coming up or the changes, so that once a year that system is now reset and it goes back. So everybody, it makes sure that our designers know what they don't know, because that is always a big piece that's going to happen. So when we look at the standardization, I just want to say that OPS needs to have that review from the industry to be able to identify what they don't know.
And I'd actually love to jump in here because that's, I think, the key point to this question is the governance of it. And that is something that we've pushed for very hard. And the governance, the key principles from our perspective are certainly representation, right? Like we need to have everybody at the table, be it the province, municipalities, industry representatives from across the board to kind of review and make those decisions. And the second component is that decision-making process, because it's great to have these discussions. And I think Annik mentioned this, like we're never all going to agree, but there does need to be a decision making process that's fair and that's transparent and that moves those discussions forward. And you need to have a consistent review. So we've suggested like every 3 years, for example, and also incorporating that with a public consultation. We have the ERO system or whatever we'll look through. You can put that section of the OPS specs up for discussion and review. And that's where you can really talk about innovation and those pilot examples and bring that province-wide. Because one of the points we always made is, municipalities say like, but we're doing this something that's so innovative. And it's like, that's great. Why should it stay siloed? If it's so great, then it should be shared with all the municipalities across the province. And I think the last component of that is a valid exception process that actually reviews those cases where exception does need to be made, but again, in a very transparent, objective way, and provides that exception for that project. Because I couldn't agree more with Amanda. If we make if exceptions become the rule, then we're quickly back at exactly where we're at right now and where we started and sort of scrapping this whole initiative.
I think the exceptions thing just introduces questions. Like I know so often getting the contract details happens far later in the process than we'd like. Everyone's scrambling to get it done before, design is underway, shovels are in the ground. And so, again, like you said, just making sure that the processes actually work will be critical to the success.
Very good. Let's move on to risk. It's one of my favorite topics. Risk allocation sounds really simple in principle, right? Risk sits with whoever is best positioned to control, mitigate it, and price it. Yet in practice, it's a lot more difficult than that. Public contracts often push risk onto contractors through one-sided clauses, while owners and engineers carry unacknowledged exposure through incomplete designs or ambiguous specifications. So from the vantage point of legal, technical, and commercial and procurement, where is risk most commonly misallocated and what does it cost a project owner in the end? So Mike, I'm going to start with you. You're often in your roles and previous roles stuck in the middle trying to resolve many of these conflicts. Can you share your perspective? Oh, yeah, unmute yourself first, please.
Unmute. Technical difficulties. So I mean, risk is one of my favorite discussion topics. And that's largely because, Sandro, as you know, sometimes I like to ask uncomfortable questions, and risk is an uncomfortable topic for a lot of proponents in this. I think one of the biggest issues we need to do is we need to acknowledge that if we're going to make sure the right people have or the right parties are responsible for the risk allocation, that means we have to acknowledge that municipalities, consultants, and contractors are going to have to hold some level of risk in the process, and it has to be balanced. Right now, the general approach is kind of a little bit of the hot potato approach where we're just risk dumping onto kind of the last person in the chain that kind of holds it and thinking we're totally covered because we've dumped the risk when really, as you've mentioned, we kind of have unacknowledged exposures that we've opened ourselves up to for various reasons. So I think one of the things that needs to actually happen is when we talk about risk management and risk mitigation and risk allocation, we actually need to do it and not just dump it to the next party. We actually need to identify the risk. We need to allocate it. We need mitigation strategies, and it needs to be managed actively. Most of us, intentionally or unintentionally, don't do that. We do our best to avoid the risk altogether. Because again, it is an uncomfortable conversation to actually have to sit there and acknowledge that we have to hold the risk. How are we going to manage it? We can't just dump it. And some of those unacknowledged risks, particularly from the legal standpoint, and Annik can kind of weigh on this a little bit more, is where it comes back to bite us because we have all these exposures. And then when we get into disputes, those exposures become kind of quite prevalent because we haven't actually managed or handled the risk appropriately. And then we kind of have these knee-jerk reactions to how we change our procurement processes and our practices to try and address it without actually having kind of these larger conversations about how collectively as an industry we need to kind of sit down and look at these things and manage risk allocation. I think we have the best intentions with risk allocation, but like I said, I don't actually feel that a lot of us are actually managing or allocating the risk. We're just dumping it. And that is a fundamental problem kind of across the industry and sectors that we need to deal with because that ambiguity, that uncertainty, that risk is fundamentally driving up the costs of everything because at the end of the day, it's a question of who's going to pay for it. And whether we dump it and we pay for it on the back end through legal proceedings, or whether it gets managed up front so that the cost per dollar is lower to have a proper mitigation strategy or allocation strategy in place. We can save money by managing it properly and holding the risk where it belongs. But right now it's costing us. It's costing this province and the public ridiculous amounts of money to hold and dump risk to the wrong parties. And there's that uncertainty is just driving up costs everywhere. So.
Thank you for that.
I just want to jump in on that because I think the biggest miss sort of the biggest myth is that transferring risk protects public funds, right? Like it's public money, and you know, if you just put all the risks onto the contractor, like hands are clean, no one's at fault, and and what Michael said is exactly right. On paper, that seems like the right approach, and it makes a lot of sense, but in practice, public owners do pay for those either through contingencies in the bids or through claims afterwards. So I think, and as Bruce mentioned in his report, that communication is really critical to talk about where, like who is the best person that's responsible for holding that. And I think from the transportation sector, there are two really big factors that I think we still haven't sold for, and I want to use them here as an example. And that's the, you know, if you can't see it, you can't price it, and it's those underground surprises, be it geotechnical, you know, utilities or legacy infrastructure, because I think um, the thing we don't talk about is we didn't used to be as diligent marking and documenting how we built. So there's constant surprises from you know, as you open up the road and see what's actually there. That's actually not possible to know during the design stage, certainly not during the bid stage until that road is opened up and you see what's there. And then the other factor that's been really big, I mean, this year certainly, but starting last year, is that geopolitical uncertainty, and fuel cost prices is a great example of that.
Yeah.
How can a contractor ever be able to plan for an out-of-the-box war in the Middle East that's going to cut our fuel supply, right? So in those cases, including something like a fuel adjustment index as part of that procurement process allows for much more fair pricing and actual like cost, because what you're going to end up with is a huge contingency in the front end because contractors simply don't know. Or, you know, a contractor kind of being stuck there and going through the claim process after the fact. So I think those are two really good examples of where a more fair shared risk allocation would be really critical to lower those costs and actually move forward projects faster and better.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think that's the great points, and that's where standardization can help when it comes to reducing risk. So my brain goes right to consulting fees, where they're now asking us to put in our decision on working days and materials testing. And again, we don't really know how many working days we're going to have at the beginning of a design job for construction in 2 years. So we're estimating. But if there was a standard clause about that, take your best shot, and then a clause about when the contractors don't fulfill their working days, how that happens. And you only know those things based on experience. So having that standard language throughout the province means we're all being treated fairly. And then you'll get better prices for construction inspection at the onset, and you'll have a better way to budget the future work.
Thank you. And Nick, I mean, you don't want too much risk mitigated out because then there'd be no work for you.
I mean, I joke with my partners that are that focus on the litigation side of the construction practice that if we do our job properly at the front end, we'll put them out of business. Um, and I think I agree with all the comments made here, and I think in particular, one, I think owners, but particularly in the public sector where we hear regularly, you know, the protect the taxpayer, there needs to be an acknowledgement that construction is not risk-free, and you're not going to be able to make it risk-free for yourself. There is an onus of risk, and what I really liked, I wrote it down earlier today, was Bruce talked about the attitude that needs to be brought in, really perceiving construction as investment as opposed to an expense. Because I think when you think about investment, you naturally acknowledge that there is risk to that. There's no 100% guarantee, but at the same time, it is worthwhile taking that risk because the long-term benefits, the long-term gains, are what generate that value. And so we need to really have owners bring that perspective. And Raly said, like, site condition risk is one of the most common risks that we see offloaded, or where owners often attempt to offload it entirely onto the other parties when, even with robust due diligence, there's only so much you can figure out about what's underground until you open it up. And you're not necessarily saving money by trying to place all of that risk onto the contractor, because as everyone's been talking about, one, they may either not bid at all because the risk is too great, that is posed on them. So you're reducing competition, as Bruce spoke about earlier today. Or two, they're pricing it. They're saying, okay, what if the worst case were to happen and I open it up and there's contamination, there's physical obstructions, there's all kinds of different things. What do we do? How would I bear that risk? So you're buying really expensive insurance. And then when that worst case happens, you still get disputes, which then cost you more in terms of direct legal funds, but also time and energy on the project. If everyone's fighting about, as Michael put it, that hot potato, oh, whose responsibility was it to find this or figure this out or manage this risk? Everyone's trying to pass the buck. Well, that's taking time and energy away from solving the problem in a cost and time effective way and from the actual project itself. And so we're actually not protecting ourselves. I think what we see is so often people feel safe when the legal words on the page look like a promise of cost certainty and schedule certainty, but the reality is that that's not what you're actually achieving. And I think, so don't rush. That's another thing that we see is take the time that you need to actually do detailed design, to do the due diligence required. Again, Bruce mentioned that $100 at the pre-planning stage to address the issue versus, sorry, $10, no, sorry, $100 at the pre-planning stage, $1,000 during the design stage, and $10,000 at the construction stage. So again, so often we see that risk compounded through highly compressed planning and design stages. Frankly, I think often because emotionally there's something about seeing the shovel in the ground that speaks to progress. You know, that the shareholders, the taxpayers can see that things are happening and so then feel better about it when maybe we should have spent a little more time before doing that. So
Yeah, and
Great.
if I can add
Yeah.
on kind of to that, one of the other myths, and kind of Annik touched on it, is this idea that it can be risk free. And that myth, it leads you to not actually, for risks that you should assume, it leads you to not managing that assumption of risk. And so that creates this much larger compounded problem, right? Like, sometimes the best risk strategy and the most cost-effective risk strategy is to assume the risk. And that's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but sometimes that is the best outcome. And if we're ignoring and we think we can be risk-free, we're not having the proper conversations around risk assumption and how we manage that assumption of risk. And that is quite often a big miss that I see kind of across the board, is there is no discussion or strategy to even look at whether or not assuming it is actually the best option for taxpayer or otherwise, right? So
Yeah, very great points. Great points. We can do a whole webinar just on risk.
yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't
we
have time.
have.
We've only got like 15 minutes left, but we got 2 questions to go. Now, there have been some really good questions and comments in the Q&A. So I think we did answer the one question already, but some good comments as well to add to the conversation. So let's get into claims. So whether it's a diffuse site condition, an incomplete set of tender documents, or design build scope that blurs professional responsibility, the key is a handoff between design and construction is where disputes are born, and then everyone gets involved. So how can we better bring these entities together, discuss these issues before they become problems? Since this confusion, these disputes often result in claims, let's start with the legal perspective. So, Annik, can you provide some commentary here?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we spoke about, bringing the right attitude is the best way that you can avoid claims. approaching the project in a collaborative type of manner. Like, frankly, again, I tell clients all the time, there's no bulletproof contract. You can have a beautifully written, balanced contract, and if people come into the project with the wrong attitude, it can become a nightmare in any event. But similarly, you can have a really challenging contract risk allocation, and if the parties come to the table with the right attitude, that project can succeed. So I do think that the contract, and again, where standardization and where fair, balanced risk allocation can really help is the contracts help set the tone for those relationships. It helps establish how we plan to treat each other and manage risk together and deal with issues as a team. And so if you're starting with a document that is creating a combative environment, one that encourages the pass the hot potato kind of culture, then you are setting a tone for your relationship that is establishing a culture of disputes and setting yourself up for that to be very likely the ultimate outcome. Whereas if you stick closer to standard forms, minimize revisions to, using supplementary conditions to shift risk in ways that make it more challenging to manage, then again, you're creating an environment where people are more likely to succeed. And again, it's not going to be perfect. There's only so much a contract can do for the people on the ground actually living it every day. But I think it's an important tone setting relationship structure document that shouldn't be underestimated in how it can affect the day-to-day goings on. Like I so often hear people talk about contract as a sword or a shield. And I think what's concerning about that is all of those are battle implements. Which again, if we think about it more as a roadmap, something that is a tool as opposed to something that is an implement of defense or attack, again, it just helps get the right mindset to the table. So it can be really critical to think about it in that way, which again comes back to if we're going to standardize, making sure that we have the right process to establish those standards so it creates and fosters that right environment and culture for the project parties.
Excellent. So, Amanda, I'm going to move to you on this question as well, because you've actually been on both sides. So where do you see this?
Yeah, and this was another of the big pieces of conversation with the MEA ACEC contract. So there's a bunch of risk pieces that involve the performance of the consultant. So admittedly, there are times where the consultant is not performing and you don't have the ability to let them go because you don't have it in your agreement because you've never had to do that before. So when we use the standardized MEA ACEC one, there are very, not strict, but it's laid out on how you can terminate that relationship and what the obligations of the engineer are back to the municipality. But it also allows the engineer the right to come back and say, this was the information that wasn't provided. And so I need now to be able to get paid to do this additional work. So it takes the risk off. So now I can bid it easier because I know that if there's unknowns, like, oh, I think there's PCBs in that neighborhood, but I don't know if it's going to be in my site, I'm going to have to do additional environmental testing. In the contract, it covers that's going to happen later, right? So I will have a lower price going in because I'm not worried about those risks. So I think then there's no claims going back on breach of contract because I'm now covered. So same when it goes into the contractor piece, between design and construction, there's always, again, the risk that there's unknowns found in the field that the design didn't contemplate. And when you have the standard contract through, a lot of those items are going to be identified because they've been based on past experience. And then the MEA contract, again, has it explained how we're going to deal with those things in the field. So you avoid the legal fees because you can work through it with your standard contract.
Who'd like to weigh in next?
Go ahead, Raly. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I have two sort of comments on this and their best advice. This will be a shocker from a contractor perspective, but Early contractor involvement is certainly the first one. And the second one is a real-time issue resolution process, authority, et cetera. So for the early contractor involvement, I mean, I think Amanda and Annik certainly touched on it, is having the humility to recognize the experience and expertise that's brought in, right? And not knowing what you don't know. And I think what some people might say is early contractor involvement compromises fairness in procurement. And I would say, like, it depends, not if it's structured transparently. So there are models like progressive design build or the pre-qualified advisory phases that preserve that fairness, and you're actually getting that construction expertise that I think, as we made very clear, is going to save you thousands, if not hundreds of thousands down the road without actually including the contractor in that early phase. And then it's the issue resolution. So whether we call it dispute resolution, which I think always gets everyone's guard up, but so let's say issue. And that's really, what are your rapid response protocols? If something happens, who is responsible? Who is making the decision? And let's make sure that those decisions are made in hours and days, not in months long time. One of the sort of biggest visuals that I think no one likes to talk about, we're all familiar with congestion and traffic, especially in the GTA. And this myth of the empty work site that doesn't have any workers and no one is actually doing anything, but the lane is blocked. And it surprises people when we say that's probably because they're waiting for a change order decision. And that change order decision, depending on which municipality you might be in, could happen on the spot that same day, or in some cases with some of our contract members, takes 4, 5, 6 months to be it resolved. And again, no offense to Annik and our legal friends here, but sometimes the process is to go to the legal department on an engineering question. And speaking again about risk and sort of passing the buck and trying to pass that liability, nobody wants to be responsible for making some of these decisions. And that's where the decision-making authority is actually really critical, especially on site. And again, that can save you a lot of headaches. It can save you a lot of money, and it can actually help keep the project moving rather than being stuck. Because if I know one thing about legal counsel, it's always this depends, and it's better not, right? No, you don't want to take the risk. So again, is that an engineering question? Is that a legal question? I think that's where the communication and the diving deeper into who holds that responsibility and who is best suited to make that decision are really critical questions to ask very early on before you're actually in that situation.
And
I
if
think
I
too,
if I
your
may,
early.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
So I think that early involvement of contractors piece too is really important for the municipalities to bring in their operations groups early on in the design process so that we know some of the contract items or that are going to come forward. Like if access materials can go to the landfill site or if they need to go to a different site, as an example. But a lot of municipalities also have developer forums where they're bringing in design standards and they're talking to home builders all the time. And an end of year post-construction season meeting with a bunch of the contractors that they've done work the last year can do the same thing for opening eyes to things that are difficulties in contracts. And that's a fair process because you have more than just one contractor that you're looking at reviewing it. You can go through 4 or 5 projects that you've done in the year, get that done over the winter so that when you go to bid the next year, you're ready to put those things together with your special provisions. But then that also can be something that is fed into the governance structure of the standardized work.
Yeah, and I think I would just add that the important thing that we need to remember, and Annik kind of touched on it with her defense, like your shield or your sword, is that the contract isn't really a mechanism to kind of create these separations. It's about the partnership coming together to deliver on something. And so early engagement of that partner, those partners in that partnership, regardless of the procurement model that you choose, is extremely important. And I would suggest that there's opportunities even in a standard bid build design contract where you can deploy methods that are fair, that bring that to the table. But we really need to start looking at those contracts not as like they're not a tool of separation. They're a tool of how we're coming together to actually get the outcome that we want. And too often, I think the problem is we don't come to the table with that realization, and that immediately starts us off on the wrong foot. And that's just an area of focus. So there's a mentality piece here, definitely we need to address as well. So.
And if I
Okay, so
can just
we're
build
yeah.
on that, just for to the defense of the lawyers, but I do think that it's important when I speak about the attitude that needs to be brought to the table. That's for the lawyers as well.
Yes.
We are not coming in, particularly before we have, like, yes, once we're in litigation, that's a different animal. But for the purposes of managing issues that come up on the project, we need to avoid becoming positional. We need to avoid, as the legal, becoming the drivers of that hot potato positional game that actually gets in the way of avoiding the dispute altogether. I think there's a role that the lawyer can play, not in answering the question that should be answered properly by the engineer, but for example, in making sure that it's properly documented, that it's documented in a way that makes sense in the context of the contract. There's often I'll see things where I'm like, I think what you're trying to say is something about the contract price and the contract time, but none of those words are here. And so how this might actually get interpreted it remains to be seen. So I think the lawyer as a player in the project, as again another tool in the tool belt to help get things done, can be very important. But we also need to make sure that we bring the right attitude to the table, so that we don't fall into that stereotype of being the propagators of that dispute culture.
Excellent. Okay, so we have literally just a few minutes left. So I'm going to do something that's very unfair, and that is to give you a few seconds to answer this last question, and that is, where do we go from here? Okay, so we've talked about the issues. This isn't the first time it's been brought up. I know CDO, the reason it was brought together however many years ago, 20 years ago, was to actually discuss how to do procurement better. So we've put forward guides, we've done this. What's next? Where do we go from here? And Raly, is the voice of your association and your members, I'll give you the first opportunity to tell us, where do we go from here?
Oh, right in the hot seat. You know what? I would say we're here. I mean, it is great that the Ontario government is leading the standardization efforts, and it's happening. And I think what we all need to think about, because it is going to be an adjustment. It's going to be a huge adjustment, and it's going to be probably a little bit turbulent until we get settled in that. But it's moving forward, and I genuinely think it's for the best. And I think we all need to change our mindset on not resisting it, but asking the question, how can we make this work? And I think if we all do that, we will, in 5 years from now, we'll be in a much better spot than we are now.
Okay. Mike, former chair and president of OSPE, you're next.
So I really think it's quite simple. One is we need to change our mindset and approach to how we're managing. The next step is we've been talking about these for the better part of 2 decades, and things do continue to evolve, but we need to start adopting. Like, we do kind of know what we got to do here. We just need the initiative to adopt, and that means we need the forums to make adoption possible. So we need to find a way to convene the appropriate people around the table to help with the adoption kind of across the province. And I'll leave it at that. So,
okay. Amanda.
I think every public buyer here needs to talk to their clerk and ask about where these standardizations are coming from, and make sure that everybody's on the ERO. They know the updates, they jump on board, they get involved, be part of the implementation and understand what it's going to do. Make it a benefit to your municipality instead of rewriting stuff all over. Take it, move it, and see how you can use it.
And Annik, last word to the lawyer.
Oh, I feel like I'm just going to summarize what everyone else has already said, which is we need to make sure that everyone is at the table, that everyone brings the right attitude to that table and that we communicate and collaborate, because we have brilliant minds in this industry that are capable of incredible things. And we just need to create the environment for them to be able to bring those talents to bear. And so I think if we can create a standardized environment that facilitates that and allows that to really grow and thrive, that will be in the interest of the industry all around.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and your invaluable time with us today. It's obvious from the conversations that things need to change in order to provide better value for money in a way we design and build infrastructure that our communities rely on. I'm going to say one last thing as well, since I'm the moderator, I get the last voice, and that is we've been advocating for a qualifications-based selection process as well. And the process for procurement isn't just based on qualifications, but it changes the conversation and relationship between all the parties involved to really be that collaborative experience. So more on that later. And the other thing too is this won't be the last procurement day. We will be doing another one next year. And we look to bring in the voice of the procurement specialists in this as well, so that they can provide their perspective, talk about some processes that don't work with them. I know the City of Toronto is moving towards a QBS model or something similar to that. So we'll hopefully share some of their experience with moving forward with that. So with that, thank you very much. Back to you, Andrew. Oh, and Andrew may not be here. So if he's not, I'll give him 10 more seconds. If not, I'll just close it off by thanking everyone for coming today. Okay, let's just do that. Thank you all for joining today. Oh, there he is. Go ahead, Andrew.
Sandro, stealing my thunder. It's all good. So thank you, Sandro, and thank you to all of our panelists for that discussion this morning. And so thank you, Amanda, Raly, Annik, and Mike. Great discussion. Really learned a lot there. So that concludes our event today, everyone. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists for sharing their insights, and thank you to all of you for attending. What we've heard throughout the morning is that while there is clear momentum to improve how we procure and deliver infrastructure, the path forward is not simple. Whether it's strengthening domestic supply chains, advancing Buy Ontario approaches, or moving towards greater standardization and smarter risk allocation, these are complex issues that require alignment across the sector. But I think one thing is clear. Better outcomes don't come from policy alone. They come from how those policies are implemented in practice. And that requires collaboration, consistency, and a shared understanding between public owners and industry. And that's exactly why the CDAO Procurement Guide is intended to support. It's not just a set of recommendations, it's a resource designed to help move conversations like the ones that we've had today into real actionable improvements. So we encourage you to continue engaging with the guide and to carry these discussions forward within your own organizations and projects, because ultimately, the future of procurement will be shaped by the decisions we make and the approaches we adopt together. Thank you again for taking the time to join us today. I believe we'll have the recording available to all participants as well. And again, we appreciate your participation and we look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you. Have a great day.